I know now some things that I didn't know before that children's story. We have been working and thinking about working on that annex that we own right near the side of the driveway. And one of the next steps is painting it. It's been a little unclear who has not only the equipment, but the talent and ability to do it. But I'm figuring if Randy starts painting his house tomorrow, he'll have the experience here in a couple of weeks when we're ready, right? All right. I think we need to insist that he wears that. It's either a disco camouflage or an Easter egg camouflage uniform when he paints it, right? Yeah. Okay. I want to start out like a lot of other churches do, not churches like us. And it's not just the Roman Catholics. That's going to come to your mind when I tell you what I want to start out doing. There's a lot of other churches that follow this tradition too. That is going to confession before they go to, or as part of their going to church. I want to do that today. Don't get worried. Don't get too nervous. I'm not going to ask you to confess. I'm going to confess, but I suspect that what I'm going to confess to, some of you will say, oh yeah, I've done that too. I had a project that I'm almost finished with at my home. It's one of those fix-up type projects. A few years ago, I had somebody else come in and I didn't feel energetic enough, and I hired a guy to rebuild the fence around my house. And he built a really nice gate over in one corner where the house and the gate connect. It was an ingenious thing. He took some tubular steel and he made a frame, and then he hooked the wood to it, and then he put a little finger out on the side of that goes over and catches in a latch, so when I shut the gate, it latches. The problem was that the steel that he used for the finger was never designed to be welded. Do you know what happens when you weld steel that is really a mild, soft steel that was never meant to be welded? It's not very strong. And it didn't take too long before I noticed it was bending, and so I bent it back, which is probably the wrong thing to do, but it wouldn't latch unless I bent it back. And I kept bending it back, and finally one day, when I bent it back, it just fell off where it had been welded on. So now I have a gate that doesn't latch. So I decided I was going to make an improvement on that gate. And to do that improvement, I needed to have another piece of steel that I would weld onto the steel that he put there, that would put the place where that finger went out a little farther, and I wouldn't have to weld it on. I could put it on like it was designed to be put on. So I had it all engineered in my head exactly how it was going to happen and how it was going to work. Spent a lot of time laying in bed at night engineering that one. And I finally decided it was time to go and get the steel. There's a little steel shop down in Clackamas where you can usually find what you need to do, and they're nice guys. So I went in there, small little shop, and I said, I need a piece of 2x3 tubular steel. It kind of looks a little bit like a 2x4, except it's not quite. It's, well, kind of between a 2x4 and a 2x3 in lumber, but in steel, it's the exact number. In wood, it's not. So I went in there and I said, I only need a piece of 2x3 tubular steel, 3 inches long. Could you cut off a piece for me like that? Oh, no, he said. We have a minimum that we have to sell. Oh, boy, I wonder how much that's going to be. What am I going to do with the leftovers? And so I said, well, okay, how much is the minimum? And he said, about 2 feet. Okay, I'll take 2 feet. So I bought it, and I put it in the back of my truck, and I came home, and it was late in the afternoon. I wasn't going to have any time to work on it that day, so I didn't want to take it in the house, because when you buy steel from a steel yard, it's still a little bit greasy. So I put it down on the floor in my garage, and I said, I will come back and pick it up when I'm ready to work on it. A week or so went by, and I was ready to work on it. So I went out to my garage and I said, I'm going to get that piece of steel. In my mind, it looked like this, about 2 feet long. How do you lose a piece of steel 2 feet long in your garage? I don't know how it worked, but I did it. I looked all over that garage. I could not find that piece of steel. I went out to my shop and looked all over the shop, the pile where I stacked scrap steel and I looked everywhere that I could think of. Then I went back to the garage and looked again. I could not find that steel for anything. So here's my confession. Well, at least part of it. What do you do when you bought something that you need to use but you can't find it? You go back to the store and buy another one, right? And Murphy's Law says that as soon as you get back home from buying that other one, what happens? You find the first one. Okay, that's exactly what happened. I went to a different steel store, but not because I didn't like the first guys. It was just because I was going past another one, and I know that they had a scrap pile over in one corner. You never knew what you were going to find there, but if you got lucky, you could find the kind of steel you wanted and about the length. I went over there and I found the right length, the right size, and I said to the guy, how much is it? And he said, did you weigh it? They had some scales right there. They sell it by the pound, just like the grocery store, right? And so I told him, yes, I did. And I said, it weighed this much. And he looked at me and he said, I don't want to have to write up the paperwork for that. Just put it in your trunk and disappear. Wow, that was great. Really? I said that to him, yes, bye. And so I got in my car and drove off with that piece of steel that I hadn't paid anything for. Went out and started working on it. I cut off 3 inches off the end of that piece of steel. The one that I bought was about 2 feet long. The one that, at least I thought that's what it was, the one that I got for free was 2 feet long. And I cut off 3 inches of that. I welded it onto another piece, and I took it out and welded it onto the steel on the side of my gate. Got it all done. Sprayed it with spray paint. It looked great. Then you know what happened? I found the other piece. But I want to show you why I didn't see it. You see the 2-foot long piece? It turned out the piece that I bought was only 1 foot long, and I was looking for a 2-foot long piece of steel and couldn't see it because there was only a 1-foot piece there. Have you ever had that happen? Where you can't find something because what you were thinking that it looked like wasn't what it looked like at all? Yeah. So that's my confession for my shop work this last couple of weeks. I screwed up. It's my own fault because I was looking for something that didn't exist until I stumbled across it and found out my mistake. You know, that's true in life about a lot of things, isn't it? I think that it's particularly true about life when we're talking about God. We get ideas inside of our heads about what God should be like, and then we go out and we look for him and something happens in our life. Have you ever heard people say, where was God when that happened? Well, God was there. It's just what they were expecting him to look like during the time that happened was different than what he thought that he should be. I want to talk about that today. Having eyes and ears. Well, before I do that, let me give you another confession. I have 2 bicycles. My friend Ken wants to give me another one. I'm going to turn it down. I got too many bicycles in my garage right now. I have one that I bought for my son Todd. My son Todd is just a die-hard biker. He's got a mountain bike, and he's got 2 or 3 road bikes, and he's got a gravel bike. Do you know what a gravel bike is? It kind of looks like a road bike, but it kind of has bigger tires like a mountain bike, and so anyway, it's too specialized for me. But I bought one of his old road bikes a couple of years ago. You can kind of see it there, and the left side of that picture is hanging up on the rack in my garage. It's been there. I haven't ridden it for a couple of years. I've been riding my mountain bike a little bit more, and then for the last year I haven't ridden much at all. But I decided I was going to get back on that road bike, and so I went out to my garage and pulled it off the rack, and I set it on the floor, and both tires were absolutely empty, just like that. So, well, no problem. I will pump up those tires and take it out for a ride. So you can see in that picture, you see right about in the middle of the picture, between the bicycle and the air compressor, there are 2 hand bicycle pumps. That's where I keep them. The one on the left is for high pressure stuff. My mountain bike has a couple of things that have really high pressure on it, and it takes a long time if you're using a lesser pump. But the one on the right is the one I use for the tires. It pumps up a lot faster. And so I went over there to that corner expecting to find that pump, and it was not there. I looked all over the garage. I could not find it. In the back of my mind, though, I remembered last time I had that pump, I went somewhere and took my travel trailer, and I have one of those little hatches on the side of the travel trailer on the outside that I usually put that pump in. And I thought, maybe I didn't take that out of there when I came home from that trip. So I got in my car, and I drove over to where I store my travel trailer when I'm not using it, took my key, opened up that hatch, and I'm just thinking, it's going to be right in here. There's a little drawer that pulls out. I'm going to pull out that drawer, and it's going to be there. I pulled it out. It wasn't there. It just wasn't there. Oh, no. I looked inside the travel trailer. Inside or outside in that hatch, it was the only place it could have been. That's the only place I've ever put it. And I couldn't find it. So I went home and said, I've got to look farther in my garage. And I'd torn the garage apart. I'd looked on this side, and I'd looked on that side. I'd looked everywhere, I thought. So I went home. Let's see if you have sharper eyes than I do. Can you see where that pump is? Yeah, right up there on the countertop, leaning on top of one of those little generators. I came home, and I must have just emptied the truck out and put it right up there. You look at the picture there, and it's not that far from where I usually keep it on the floor, is it? I confess I was so locked in on thinking it was going to be right there by that other pump on the floor that I couldn't see it less than 4 feet away. Oh, man. This is one of those confessions where I have to say I kicked myself for just being so blind. About life, same way, right? Do some people look for God in the wrong places? Yeah. Have you ever looked for God in the wrong place and kind of walked away and said, He's not there? Only to realize He really was there. You just were looking and kind of cross-eyed or maybe just a little bit off a little bit. Remember when the Russian cosmonaut went up into space and they came back? After he had orbited the Earth a few times, they asked him if he was far enough away from the Earth and close enough to heaven that he saw God. He proclaimed with all kinds of boldness, I didn't see any evidence of God whatsoever. I was so proud of that first Christmas. We had spacecraft that went up and landed on the moon. And as they were orbiting the moon and looking back and they could see Earth, our astronauts read, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Those guys were not told by NASA that they had to do that. That was a government program. They could not be told what to do that legally. But they looked, and that's what they saw, so that's what they read. It depends on how and where you look. Let's talk about that today. Let's talk about some verses in the Bible that talk about how sometimes we have eyes but can't see and ears that can't hear. Randy read just a little bit about that in the scripture reading. Did you like the way that it ended? Jesus said, you guys are really privileged because you have eyes that can see and you have ears that can hear. And prophets and righteous people throughout the years have longed to be able to see what you are seeing right now. Doesn't take too much thinking to remember all of those people in years past were looking for the Messiah. And Jesus was telling him, disciples, you're looking at the Messiah when you look at me. Well, let's go back a few years from that, a few years behind that, to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It reads like this. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, you are living among a rebellious people. Now just imagine, God is talking to Ezekiel. Ezekiel is a prophet. Prophet just simply means spokesman. And God was giving him a message for him to deliver. He started out like this, Son of man, you're living among a rebellious people. Do you remember about the time when the book of Ezekiel was written? It was written just before students of Bible history say an event happened called the Babylonian captivity. You know much about that? God's people, Israel, were there about 600 BC, maybe a little bit over that. And they had not been living up to what God wanted them to live up to. God had sent them more prophets, one after another, telling them, hey guys, shape up. You're blowing it. You're messing things up. You're doing yourselves in because you're not listening to me. They just ignored him, went on their own way. And finally God says, I've got to get their attention somehow. So I'm going to bring Nebuchadnezzar and his armies in and take them captive and take a whole bunch of captives and march them back across the desert, back over to where Iraq is today. Ever heard of Baghdad? Nebuchadnezzar had a palace right across the river from present-day Baghdad. That was his headquarters. That's where he marched Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and a whole bunch of other people over there. But before that happened, God comes to Ezekiel and he says, you're living among a rebellious people. And here's how he described them. They have eyes to see, but they don't see. Is there anything sadder than somebody who has functional eyes but refuses to use them and look at something? And they have ears to hear, but they don't hear because they are a rebellious people. In other words, God's saying, I gave them everything they needed to know. I gave them all the evidence and everything, and they just ignored it. They wouldn't look at it. He tells Ezekiel, here's what I want you to do to get these people's attention. If you read through here, it's really kind of interesting. God says to Ezekiel, I want you to pack up a pack of everything that you would take if you were going to be marching off with an army that had invaded your country and taken you captive. I want you to go out in the street, just picture this, a great big huge backpack with some bags he's carrying or something like that. I want you to go out in the street and sit on the street corners. You're going to attract a lot of attention because nobody else is standing out there in the street like that. And people are going to come saying, hey, Ezekiel, what in the world are you doing? And then I want you to tell them that God said this is an object lesson to tell them what they're going to be doing in just a short amount of time when the armies come and take them captive. And he said, if they don't listen today, I want you to do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and the day after. I want you out there telling these people, getting them prepared. Well, you know that description that God gave of his people. The people that in other places of Scripture he described as the apple of his eye. It must have pained him an awful lot to have to describe his own people, the ones he loved above all else, as a rebellious people that just wouldn't listen. But that's what he did. Because they had eyes and ears, but they lost the ability to use them because of just sheer, outright rebellion. Rebellious thoughts often cause blindness or deafness. Perhaps you have seen it happen in a situation that you know of. Maybe a family. Probably not a family around that didn't have a teenager that at one time was hitting a stage of rebellion, which, by the way, is not an abnormal thing for teenagers to do. You know that, right? And you don't want to worry about the teenagers that are rebelling as much as you do about the ones that don't. Because they're the ones that don't have enough get up and go to get out and do anything. But there's probably not a time when a parent hasn't said, I've been trying to give them good advice, something that would save them, and they just won't listen. They don't see it. They won't hear me. Eyes that don't see, and ears that don't hear. Well, let's go to another section of Scripture that talks about this. Matthew chapter 13. First part of Matthew chapter 13 is the story of Jesus telling the parable of the sower. Remember that? Pastor Alex preached about it a few weeks ago, about the farmer that went out and planted the seeds out in his ground. When he got all done with that story, the disciples came to Jesus, and I can imagine that maybe, the story kind of indicates that maybe there was another miracle where people were hungry and didn't have any food, and Jesus had a few loaves of bread. It's not the story of the little boy's lunch. It's a different one. And they fed, I think it was 7,000 people in this time. And I don't know if the people were still there just chowing down the rest of their lunch or when it was, but shortly after Jesus gets done telling that parable, the disciples come to him and says, Jesus, why do you insist on just telling these parables? I mean, there are a lot of people that just aren't getting it. Why don't you just tell them plainly? And Jesus says these people are blind and deaf because they have preconceived ideas of what they ought to be hearing. Do you remember what it was that people were thinking that they ought to be seeing when they saw the Messiah come in Jesus' day? They were suffering under the rule of the Roman Empire. What they were really looking for was not a Messiah to deliver them from sin, but somebody that could come and raise up an army and drive the Roman armies off into the Mediterranean Ocean and into defeat. Do you remember how many times Jesus said, hey, I'm your man, I'll do that? No, he didn't say that once, did he? He absolutely refused to touch that. People sometimes don't see because they expect to see something else. He said to his disciples, he said, you guys are really blessed, however, because your eyes are working great and your ears are working great. Your mind is expecting the right things, and you are able to see and to hear the things that I'm saying. You get my parables. And the reason that I tell parables is so that the people that are ready to hear what I'm trying to say can hear it, and I don't waste the energy of the people that would never get it in the first place. And then he said that really interesting phrase that a lot of people think is really an unfair sort of thing. But it makes all the sense in the world in this context. He said, to the person who has, more will be given. And to the person who doesn't have, anything that goes their way will be taken away from them. Now, if you're thinking in terms about money and earthly possessions, that is about as unfair as it gets, isn't it? But if you're thinking about Jesus talking about people who have such preconceived ideas that they're not going to listen, it makes all the sense in the world. If you're willing to listen to me, Jesus said, you're going to get a really big blessing out of this. But the people that don't listen and aren't willing to listen and think that I'm just some flash in the pan itinerant preacher, they're not going to get it. And that message and that blessing, it's not so much that it will be taken away from them as much as it will be that they just simply won't get it in the first place. Jesus is saying that his disciples are blessed because their eyes and ears are functional, and as a result they're perceiving things. Well, remember what he said? They're perceiving things that many prophets and righteous people long to look at for years and years and years. There's a lesson here about looking and listening for things that are important, isn't there? Or how about this one, the book of Isaiah? This is an interesting one. Isaiah chapter 55. Remember how it starts out? You come to me and buy water and food without price. Remember all of that? This is a wonderful section of Scripture. You could do far worse than select this section of Scripture as one that you want to commit to memory or almost to memory, because it just has so many wonderful, wonderful things in it. But then, if you're reading it, you could get down a little farther, where God says, I want you to come to me if you have sins and talk to me about them, because I will abundantly pardon. I will forgive. How do you like that thought? When you've messed up, think about not just minimal forgiveness, but an abundant forgiveness. Can you just picture God standing back as you're stammering out this embarrassed confession of what you did wrong, and God standing out, he's opening his arms out like this, like he's getting ready to hug you? That seems to be his attitude to sinners who come to him for forgiveness. And then he says, that's how I want you to understand this. And that's not how people think about this. When people think about forgiveness, they think about the minimal amount required or that could be gotten away with. But not me. I don't think like people think. My thoughts are, do you remember these verses? My thoughts are higher above your thoughts than the heavens are above the earth. It's an amazing thing to think about, that God exists, but he operates and thinks and acts on a higher plane than we'll ever be able to operate on, or maybe ever even be able to imagine. When you picture God abundantly pardon, doesn't just say, I don't know anybody else but him. How did he get to be that way? It's a mystery, a wonderful mystery. It's one of those that all we can do is just say we can't understand why he's that way, but we're sure glad he is. There's hope for us in this promise that he left us, but maybe in some different ways than just talking about forgiveness. The hope is that God comes to us and says, hey, I want you to come to me. I've got something that I want to give to you, and I will give it to you. It's way above and beyond anything you could imagine, but I'll give it to you without price. I'll just give it to you as a gift. There are a lot of people that have messed up their lives who didn't hear that, because they got so confused about who God was and how he seemed to act that, well, one guy wrote a whole book about it. He called God a wild, untamable God. And in some ways, that's true. When you think about it from our human perspective, we cannot tame God and force him to act like we expect him to act, can we? God's going to act like he acts, and if we want to get the benefit of that or understand anything at all about it, we better just step back a little bit and say, wow, God, I didn't expect you to act that way, but man, I'm sure glad you did. Well, Isaiah chapter 55 says that there are people there that are blind and deaf to that message too. I know a lot of people They've just kind of wimped out on the whole idea of God because they've run out onto things that they just couldn't understand about him. Things like, how could God speak a word and a world came into existence? How could he speak a word and the things that filled that world came into existence? How is it possible, when you start studying the universe and all of its vastness, how is it possible to imagine that there's a God who the Bible says orders all of that things in that universe? I don't know. I can kind of imagine. In the back of my mind, I can picture our air traffic control system. And it's a complex system. It's amazing. It's miraculous to me that it works, that airplanes can be scheduled to arrive pretty much on time, most of the time. It's an amazing thing that it works that well. But multiply that by an infinite number and think about God managing the traffic control systems for the planets. And then think about how he steps out of that role without quitting it, still getting the job done, and comes down to people like you and me and said, hey, you're important to me. You, yourself, not you as a whole group, although I like the whole group together, but you individually, you're really important to me. How does he have time to pay attention to the things that are on my agenda and my concern list when he's managing the whole universe? Can you wrap your head around that? I can't. Sometimes people get hung up on that, and those things that they can't understand make it so they finally just walk away and wash their hands of the whole thing and say, it's too complex. The whole idea of God is too big. It's just impossible. Those people, at that point, become people that have eyes that cannot see and ears that cannot hear. You know, there's good news when you're confronted with those kinds of mysteries. I want to take you to the little book of James, clear toward the back of the New Testament, almost to the end of it. James says, consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know, well, let's stop there for a minute and talk about that. When was the last time that you rejoiced because you faced something that was really tough? Come on, confession is good for the soul. I'm not going to ask for you to hold up your hands, but I'm going to hold up mine and say, boy, there are times in this life when you just have to say, I wish I was not involved in this. I would do anything to escape it, right? And here James comes along pretending to speak for God. And he says this crazy thing, and we just think he's pretending. He says, consider pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. That presumes that you're persevering, right? Read the next verse. It said, so go ahead, rejoice in that, and let perseverance finish its work so that you could be mature and complete and not lacking in anything. Well, you know, sometimes it's easy in hindsight to look back on something that we went through that we never ever want to go through again and say, wow, I did really learn some pretty good lessons from that. And you know, it's true, if you want to talk to somebody and get counsel from somebody about how to deal with an almost impossible situation, the person you want to talk to is somebody that's never faced an impossible situation and is just innocent of all that kind of stuff. You want to talk to somebody who's gone through it and survived it, right? So they can give you hope that it's possible to do that. So, you know, it's true. But would any of us choose to go through tough times it's like to develop muscles? I'm not sure. But then there's that next verse. I want to tie this back to that thought from Isaiah about God being so much beyond us that it's impossible for us to understand everything about him. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. If anybody lacks eyesight, if any of you lacks the ability to hear, he should ask God, and look what it says, God who gives generously to everyone. Have you heard or seen a parent whose kid is acting up in the grocery store? Mom, Dad, I want a piece of that candy over there. Would you buy me that? And Mom and Dad are saying, no, we're going to have lunch in just a little bit. But the kid is just incessant. They don't give up. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And finally, to get the kid off their back, Mom or Dad, okay. And they buy the candy for them, grudgingly. No, doesn't describe God when we go to him and ask him for forgiveness. It says, this is a wonderful promise. He's going to respond to that prayer for wisdom with generosity. More than we want, more than we ask for. And look at the rest of it. Without finding fault. Without coming back and saying, you idiot, now you're asking for wisdom. After you messed everything up, now you're asking for it. No. God's not going to do that. He's going to give generously without finding fault. And that promises it will be given to you. So is there anything that we could do? We know that God's going to give it to us, and Randy, you're right. Everything God gives to us is a gift, no quid pro quo. You have to stop and say that right? Otherwise you get it mixed up. Nothing like that. He's always going to give it generously. That's what we've come to expect from him. That's what we should expect from him, what he wants us to expect from him. And it's all going to be to his glory and credit when we get it. But is there anything, are there any things that we could do that might prepare our hearts so that when God comes to us and said, here's the wisdom I want you to have, that we could make sure that we had the eyesight and the hearing to be able to see it and to be able to listen to it? I want to suggest a couple of things to you today. Here's the question. So how do we make sure that we're able to see and hear the things of God? I've got several things here. First one, quash. You know what that word means, don't you? You don't hear it very often. Quash, it means just squish it. It kind of sounds like the word. Make it go away. Quash any possible rebellious inclinations. We saw what they did for Israel back in Ezekiel's day. They just made it so these people couldn't possibly see what God was wanting them to see or hear what he wanted to say to them. Quash any possible rebellious inclinations that you can possibly quash. Get rid of them. That's the first step. The second thing, stay open to finding that things could be different than what you might expect. Have you ever noticed when you pray and pray and pray for something that you want God to do, and God just quit? Well, you'd think he quit, but he just simply doesn't do what you ask him to do. But when it gets all done, you find out he did something that was a whole lot better? How many times has that happened? A few years ago, we had one of those big ice storms. What do you call them? Silver thaws here in our area. We had snow on the ground already, 6 or 8 inches, and we had a silver thaw, and then the winds came. We had a big Douglas fir tree about this big around beside my house. My son Kip was outside playing, and he was out playing in the snow, and he came running in. He said, Mom, Dad, we got a tree that's going to fall over. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, because it's coming loose with the roots, and the roots are coming up off of the ground on one side. So we went out, and sure enough, this great big tree had roots that were coming up in the air like this and then settling back down when the wind would die down. Oh boy. We started praying, God, don't let that tree fall down on top of our house. Please knock down the wind. But the wind didn't quit. And the tree fell down on top of my house. I was there. I watched it. It just laid over so nice and gently, right on top of the house. And I didn't really see any damage immediately. I mean, you would think a great big tree like that would be crunch. No, it didn't do that. It just laid down gently. Had been trying to find an arborist. Kind of hard when the whole city is covered with silver thaw. They're kind of in short supply, but it turned out I finally got a hold of somebody that said, the owner of our company is right on your street, I think. And they called him. He was a block down the street from my house. I had another tree right beside that looked like it was going to go too. He grabbed his chainsaw and his spurs, and he climbed up that other tree and trimmed off every branch on it. It's like taking the sail down on a sailboat. And that one, even though the root wad was lifting up, went right back into the ground. And then he came into my house. There was a big branch about this big around, came right through the ceiling into my family room, still hooked onto the tree. He said, don't worry about that. He said, this stuff is going to be gone in a day or two. I'll take care of you. We'll get that tree off your roof for you. I think that was on Monday. Couldn't get any kind of equipment into our neighborhood on Monday or Tuesday, but on Wednesday the road was clear. He brought in a great big mobile crane, and he got up there. First thing he did is he sawed off that branch from the trunk, and then he came inside the house and he pulled it back into our house and hauled it out, left a big hole in my ceiling. I'm just shaking my head. Oh no, how are we going to get away with this? What are we going to have to do to fix this? He cut that tree up in sections and hooked a chain from that, or a cable from that crane onto it, and lifted it off without causing any more damage and laid it down. By this time he had all the branches off. He laid it down in a pile on the street, a whole bunch of logs. My next thought was, what in the world am I going to do with those logs? I got to get rid of those. Those are my logs. They're piled up beside the curb out in the street. I phoned up a friend of mine who had a trucking company. I said, hey, do you have is it worth your while? I described what we had. These are great Douglas fir logs. Do you have a tree that could haul these off to a mill somewhere so I could sell them to a mill? He said, how many you got? And I described it to him. He said, no, it wouldn't be worth what you'd have to pay for the truck, for what you'd get out of those logs for lumber. And I'm still thinking, well, man, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to go into the firewood business. And I'm out there looking at it, and my neighbor from across the street came over, and he said, hey, what are you going to do with those logs? And I said, well, I guess I'm going to sell them for firewood. And he said, no, you're not. Really? What am I going to do? He said, you can't sell them for firewood. They're already sold. The only thing it is I have to figure out how much I'm going to pay you. And I'm going to pay you top price for these. The only thing I'm going to ask is, could you find some way of cutting them into lengths of about 1.5 feet long so they'll fit in my little wood stove? He said, don't worry about hauling over to my house or splitting them up. I love to split firewood, and I've got 2 teenage boys at home, and we have a wheelbarrow. If you just saw them up, they'll haul them off. And he came over. He did pay me more than the price, more than the going price for firewood. Remember, I'd prayed, God, keep that tree off of my roof. I had an old cedar shake roof. I already knew that it needed to be replaced. I'd been up there and I'd measured it, and I'd gone out and I figured out all the materials I'd need to replace it myself. Being a confirmed do-it-yourselfer, I thought maybe I can get my dad to come up and help me. We can put that roof on together, and maybe it'd take us a week of working. And I figured out it was going to cost me a couple $1,000s out of my pocket. And I asked the insurance company, will you pay to get a new roof on my house? Oh, they were Scrooges. No, we're only going to pay to patch the hole, they said. Well, that answered that question. But they looked at that hole in the ceiling in my house. Sheetrock, nice patterned in the drywall texture in the ceiling. They said, you're going to have to redo that whole ceiling to make it all match. And I was thinking they were probably right. I'm thinking about it one day, and a couple of weeks later, and still had the hole up there. And we had a tarp over the roof, so it wasn't leaking. A friend of mine came by and he said, "When are you going to patch that hole?" And I said, "Well, I can patch it, but I don't know how in the world we're going to match that texture." And he said, "You patch that hole, and I'm going to come by on Saturday night after you get it done, and I'm going to match that texture for you." And I said, "Well, how am I going to get the paint to blend in?" He said, "You take a little piece of that texture and take it down to the paint company, and they'll put it in their computer, and they'll mix you up some paint that'll match. Buy the least amount that you can, and I'll come back. I can blend that in. You'll never see it." Whoa. So I went to the paint company. It cost me $20. You know, the insurance company allowed me $1,000 for that whole job. I paid $20 and got that whole patch, the texture matched, and got the paint blended in. You know what I did with the extra money? That paid for the materials to put the roof on. I got all done with the new roof without spending any money out of my own pocket. And I had been thinking, what a tragedy. God, don't let that tree fall on my house. It's going to cause terrible damage. Got a new roof out of the deal. What an amazing thing. Stay open to finding things different than what you might expect. Don't try to define God too closely, because God has ways to work of which we are blissfully ignorant. God has better ways for us. The last thing, we need to study Jesus, to study his life, to study his character, to study the ways that he typically behaves, so we can develop some confidence in him to say, okay, God, you know better than us. We'll just sit here. We won't tell you what to do. We'll just sit here and wait. Help us to see what we need to see and to hear what we need to hear. And I have one more thing that we need to do if we're going to see and hear like we need to see. And it's this one. Rejoice that we have a God who dearly wants us to see and to hear him. He's not some mysterious guy off someplace that's trying to hide from us. He wants definitely to be known by us. Rejoice, because God is like that. We're going to sing a hymn that when I first heard about it, we were working on the hymns long before I knew I was going to be preaching this week. And they picked that song for our closing hymn, Showers of Blessing. And I first was thinking maybe we should change that to maybe something like Open My Eyes That I Might See, or whatever. But then I got thinking, no, let's not change that. Let's leave it. Because sometimes we can pray that prayer, Lord, give us those showers of blessing, when we're totally blind and deaf to see and hear that they're already here. Can you switch that around just a little bit and sing this hymn? Let's try it.
I'm not even sure why I picked that song, but it worked. So, yeah, this is one of those fun things. Do we have the lyric? Hang on just a second. Showers of blessing, this is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessing we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessing,
precious reviving again. Over the hills and the valleys, shower abundance of rain, showers of blessing, showers of blessing we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessing, thunder upon us, O Lord. Grant us to know a refreshing. Come and now honor your word. Showers of blessing, showers of blessing we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we need. There shall be showers of blessing, only today they might fall. Now as to God we're confessing, now as on Jesus we call. Showers of blessing, showers of blessing, showers of blessing we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers